And the Hangout on Air is live.
There we go.
So, are we really expecting anybody else?
Shreve called me and said he might be a little late. He was on the road, you know.
Okay.
So, that being a given, he says, but he's going to try his best to get back in, because his daughters are getting ready to have a baby today.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, he has about 75 grandchildren. So.
What?
Really?
Are you serious?
I think he has about 40 grandchildren.
How many children? Yeah.
How many children?
Don't get me to lying, okay?
But
I think it's about 8 children.
No, I think it's more than that. I saw it written someplace. I don't know if it was on Inner Child or.
I think he has about 8 children or something of that nature, 8 or 9 children,
Oh, Lord.
And, each one of the children, have large families. Then he has some greats running around too as well.
Oh, I hope I don't live that long.
Wow. Okay.
So most certainly it's a blessing,
Yeah.
Speaking of which, like we all came up in multi-generation families, when we were young back, you're going back like 4 or 5 decades ago. And, it's a beauty, like in, just about every third world nation, your wealth is counted by your family size, whereas here we've been so conditioned, 2.3 children and all that kind of nonsense, and also we've been, castrated as African Americans for having large families, because they purport that they're taking care of us. So to speak.
Right. But I was just saying to Venita about an hour ago that, I think young women today need to really give a lot of thought to who's going to take care of their child, if they have to go back to work, because we're not in those extended families. And
right.
So, finding a stranger that, that you feel comfortable with is more than a notion.
Yes, it is.
I was not around a large extended family, but because I grew up in the church, they were all the church folk.
Yeah.
And so an old woman who had taken care of my baby brother in the 70s, ended up taking care of my son and his cousin for the first 2 years of their life, But I don't really know who you turn to today these days.
Yeah. It's tough.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
And to feed them, Bill. You can't have 8 children a day and feed them. Now I don't know what your occupation is, but
I have 11.
A lot. You have what?
11.
Did you say 1-1?
Yeah, 1-1.
And what are they? They're all college graduates. And
yeah, I had three by the first marriage and 8 by the second, and 2 of them are not college age yet. Though the next to youngest has been accepted to college, but all of them, are college graduates or in college, or and then some of them are actually working towards their extended degrees like their masters and things of that nature. So it's been a blessing. But I attribute that all to my wife who did homeschooling.
Okay, well, I think they don't make women like they used to or something, because I'm only good for the 2 I have, 10 years. And I'm not ashamed about it. I'm not ashamed. I just am not party.
Well, it was left up to me to have them. I don't think I'd have any.
Well, now. Okay.
No, I'm talking about if I had to bear them.
Oh, yeah, because it's too much work. That's what I'm saying. The children are wonderful, but I can't. I'm not good for 8, 10, 4, 3. I'm not good for it.
Yeah.
Well, I had the one, and I knew that was not an experience I was going to go through again.
Yeah. I want to shout out to my late barista. She was a trooper. She was allergic to everything, so we couldn't use any particular type of protection. The only way we could do it was rhythm, and we got the rhythm in. So that's all.
8 times.
Oh my God!
Don't worry about it, Bill.
And you
Huh?
have 11?
Yes, 3 by the first marriage, 8 by the second.
Oh my God. I guess I was thinking it was 8 because whatever I saw about Sharif, I remember thinking, well, he's got more kids than Bill.
No, I have more kids than him.
Okay.
He has a lot more grandchildren than I do.
Okay. Wow.
All right. Well, I have one grandson, and I probably only have one, two, and I'll never, I mean, it's just a different world today anyway. We
Yeah.
had larger families when we grew up. But, anyways, here we go.
Here we go.
All right. We might as well get started. Bill, you want to do the welcome?
If you say so, Miss Michelle. Welcome, everyone. We're here at the Revolutionary Love Series, where we're addressing topics that affect our community, because as our community is affected, it also affects the world, as we dispel some of the so-called rumors in reference to, what makes us who we are, from including our past, our ancestors, and going for today. So we welcome you all here.
Okay. And we will be here until April 15th, reading Blackmailed, published by Inner Child Press. And you can learn more about the Revolutionary Love Leadership on Google+, Facebook, or YouTube, where our videos are archived. And my name's Michelle Odom, and I'm located in Brooklyn, New York. And
My name is Venita Walker, and I'm joining from Cromwell, Connecticut.
And I am William S. Peters, and I'm in southern New Jersey.
all right. And let's just acknowledge that today is the actual birthday of Martin Luther King Jr., which was certainly a good day for black folk. So happy birthday, MLK.
Mm-hmm.
Venita, you want to read the summary?
Sure, I don't have my glasses with me because I'm not prepared, but I'll try it.
All right.
The works of LaBaron Neal, Clarence Bell III, and Anthony Arnold and William Washington, page 79 to 102. The summary. LaBaron Neal shared a short story, The Promised Land, about how he became aware of racism as a child in Detroit, living on the border of Dearborn, after a white parent called the police to stop a diverse group of children from playing together. Clarence Bell III shared a poem called The Loveless. He reacts to the presence of hate in others, with a discrimination to not let it affect his being. Anthony Arnold offered 4 pieces of poetry: Profiled, Persecution, Violated, and You Don't Know Me. In the first 3 pieces, he laments the dangers of driving, walking, and living while black, and foresees a time when blacks' fear will end and change will come. In the final piece, he deals with how prejudice and stereotypes lead to false images. William Washington's contributions include 4 pieces: Going to a Revolution, a commentary on contradictions seen in black revolutionaries, especially relationships between men and women, Black Is, 4.5 Days, A Black Man, Ode to My Twin, and Black Power, poems highlighting the experiences of poverty and trying to survive, dealing with police harassment, drug addiction, and how money can change our interests in Black Power or revolution? Want me to continue?
Yeah.
These are our key points in discussion questions. Number 1, LaBaron Neal, Racism Dawning. One of the key things LaBaron Neal is relating in his piece, The Promised Land, is that at some point in his childhood, he became aware of racism. He also points to the ugly, dirty reality of racism. Even in the midst of beautiful, immaculate surroundings, saying he learned just because something looks clean on the outside doesn't make it clean everywhere else. Question number 1, William S. Peters. Do you recall how you became aware of racism? And if so, how did it happen? Number 2, he doesn't give the year when police were called to stop the diverse group of children from playing together in Michigan. But do you think children of different colors today are free to play together without legal intervention? Can you imagine anyone today calling the police to break up children at play simply because they did not have the same skin color? Question number 3. In what ways is racism hidden or sanitized? And how effective are efforts to present a clean image of race relations in America? Well, now, Miss Odom.
And one thing, Venita, just adjust your camera a bit so we can really see your face. Okay.
Yeah, put it down so I can read the glare. Okay. Better?
Yeah. And I really want us to start with question 3, the things that are highlighted in yellow. And then if we have, if we're doing good on time, look at the others. So anybody?
It says, in what ways is racism hidden or sanitized, and how effective are the efforts? I kind of think that, as in my lifetime, as I look back, racism was sanitized, primarily because of the conditions and that everybody had their place, so we weren't confronted with racism as much. And then we went through the guise, and I say guise, of equality and, civil rights, and through that movement. And so kind of racism, took a back seat and became so subverted, even though it was not eradicated, it was subverted. And I'm just talking about within my lifetime. And then, oh my God, we got a black president. And didn't it rear its ugly head, to be very prominent? And it's like, excuse my language, I don't give a damn attitude, as we see our notable Republican candidate, presidential candidate, that espouses bigotry, racism, and bias without equivocation, and we see a whole bunch of the cheerleaders, chiming in, including people that are who have sworn to protect and serve the people, are adding, their little, input, either by brutality, molestation, opinion, and various other venues, to the fact that it's okay to be racist, and this is the way I am, so, accept it, and most certainly we live in a duplicitous society, where there's one rule that applies to us and the other rule that applies to them. And I hate saying it that way, but in effect, it is true, and it starts, right from our politicians, into corporate, our corporate world, into our banking industry, our real estate industry, our food industry, including the supermarkets, right on down to the public servants. We still are not considered to be, the same public as the them who, as the old coined phrase, who live on the other side of the track.
Yeah, yeah. Um, The two things occur to me about this question. One, I was watching a video today uh, about the life of Paul Robeson, and and it talked about the period. Um, I think it was about a 15-year period, sort of after he had been called up before the House an American committee, accused of being a communist, that his name was like completely obliterated from the media, and you couldn't sell his records, you couldn't advertise his name, you couldn't rent a concert hall to him, without risking the wrath of like KKK types who would come and burn down your business. And so that was a method of control. So I just think that along with that, the influence of the media. Um, we're down to 6 corporations owning, the vast majority of media outlets in this country, and really, I don't know if we think about that enough, but it's a huge deal because they really get to shape our perception of reality.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. So that's one thing. The other thing that occurred to me about this is Obama's State of the Union address this week, where he just really didn't mention anything about black folks, and it was just kind of strange. It was kind of strange, but I think that's a part of the process of how we hide the realities in this country. We just don't talk about them.
Politically correct.
When we deny them, if somebody does talk about them. So it's a very interesting process to watch how our view of the world is sort of manipulated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, may I comment on what you said? I think when Obama first drew the straw that he was going to be the Democratic candidate, I think that a lot of liberals, black folks most certainly, rallied around that cause because it was a proud moment for us. It was something that in our minds probably was unachievable. We don't seen the Jesse Jackson and the Colin Powells and Andrew Bonds, that those particular type of attempts at which we knew whatever. But to have a black president was something. But we embraced it as our own, and I think that's part of the problem of perception in the fact that he was a president who happened to be black as opposed to a president for the blacks. He was a president for all the people. He's a president of the United States, which obviously is not as united as we like to think it is. But
right,
by the same token,
the United States does include black people. And
yeah, well, let me finish.
You're the president of the people, arguing.
Well, yeah, and I agree, and I think that we have to tender, our judgment about him, away from that he is exclusively there for black folks. He's there for the nation in the fact that there's a lot of other issues that that pertain to bigotry and bias and racism, such as the Syrian refugee crisis. All these are still based and seated and founded, upon racism, religious intolerance and things of that nature. And so that bias and bigotry, we just happen to be the whipping boy, the poster child for it, because we're easily identified because of our skin color. But most certainly that whole divide and conquer mentality, has worked and works real well, for the institutions that have a vested interest in keeping us in turmoil, and also in persecuting us. But yeah, you're right. I wish he had said more about that whole topic, or something about that whole topic, because he didn't really say anything. He didn't address any of that, that bias or bigotry. And most certainly he has the ability. I mean, doesn't he appoint the attorney general? I mean, he can give a directive like, hey, we need to go to Chicago. We need to go to, these places, Florida and Alabama and Tennessee and Missouri and, Philadelphia and New York, and investigate these cases, and take a hardline stance against it, regardless of who it is, whether Mexicans, blacks, or whomever. Because that intolerance and that runaway mentality of these mindless megalomaniacs, who wear blue uniforms, has to be, addressed.
Yeah. Well, let's see if Venita has a take. Venita, how do we sanitize racism? Anything?
I have a couple of questions. How many black-owned media networks do we own? We have billionaires and black millionaires, and they go to Africa and open up schools, and they can do a whole bunch of stuff. But I wonder why maybe none of them ever thought about having owning more of the media. And I don't really wonder. I don't want to get into a whole another conversation. I actually know why, but we do have these million and billionaires. And secondly, Barack Obama is black and white. Black folks are always ready to claim somebody. You don't know if he wants to be claimed. Number one. Okay? Which is why I think he was so appealing to so many people. And I was disappointed, whether he's black and white or not, that he didn't touch bases on situations that are of interest that's affecting black folks today. But I just wanted to make that clear that Barack is black and white.
Well, yeah, and certainly I know that, and I just want to make it clear. I don't care if he's black and white, green and blue, purple and yellow. If he's the president of the United States, that includes, a diverse constituency. And right now we have black folks, really putting their lives on the line in protests all over this country. Because of the things that we're facing, the just sort of black folks have always been getting killed in the street. I know that, and I know that a part of what we are seeing is a reflection of the media that we do have, the hand camcorders, and cell phones and dash cams, and all of that kind of thing that we did not have access to 20, 30 years ago. So part of what we're seeing is what was always there. But another part of what we're seeing is what has been unleashed as a result of having a black president, because folk have lost their minds. And so, I understood why in 2009 and 2010 and 2011 and 2012 and 2013 and 2014 and 2015 he couldn't get up and be the champion of black folk. But here you are, this is your last State of the Union to make. You start out saying that I'm going to talk about what needs to happen in the next 5, 10 years. And you can't even make reference to all of the turmoil that is going on right in front of our faces. You know, it didn't sit well with me.
And he just doesn't care. That's not what's important to him, obviously. I mean, I've accepted that. I've listened to a lot of actually, I didn't even listen to this last one of his last address because I'm tired of listening to him. I'm going to be honest with you. So there's no reason for me to cut my television on. Mm-hmm. But usually with presidents, this is when they leave their mark. They can't make any changes at this point. They know that. They want to have something to put in their little memoir, you know, let a few folks out of prison, pardon a few people, do something for black folks. So it just tells me that that's just not his priority. That's all. I've accepted it. Move on. I mean, that's what we usually do.
Yeah, and for me, you know, I'm not going to defer from this statement. You know, I agree. You know, but by the same token, for me, I would expect the president, whether he was green, white, red, blue, or yellow, you know, to address these situations about black folks. It doesn't matter what color the president is. You know, we feel that he should have more of an allegiance. Yes, sure, because he has been, you know, quoted as being black. However, I don't care if it was a white guy and a green guy, blue guy. You know, I would expect that they would address these situations that are affecting, you know, their constituency primarily, you know, when it comes to violence, you know, in the black constituency. If I had to fault anything, you know, for Obama, by him being a Chicago native and the travesty of what's going on in Chicago with, you know, Black lives, you know, I mean, truly, you know, I think that he would have had more of a personal input there, you know, and nationally, of course, there's a concern, but I just kind of expected more from him, you know, in intervening in the Chicago situation, which I think that, you know, he was a limp willy about that.
Right, right.
I guess I just don't have any expectations of him because I haven't seen where I can have expectations of him. Or even if it wasn't him, I certainly would not have any expectations of a white president to be concerned. I mean, I'm just going by, you know, my past experience from the observe. I just never, you know. So maybe I'm just don't have those expectations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when black folks were fighting for civil rights, you know, it was to a white president that we took the case, because whoever you are, you're president of all the people.
Exactly.
You would think.
And you know, well, you know, that's what we're supposed to believe as Americans. Yeah. So, you know, either we're going to test the veracity of that, you know, or we're just going to be satisfied being treated as second and third class citizens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's unacceptable. Let's move on. I'll read the Clarence Bell, point B. Clarence Bell, self-protection. Clarence Bell projects a strategy of self-protection in The Love Leader. By refusing to engage in the kind of mindless hate he sees around, he seeks to protect his own access to joy, honor, positive energy, and a clean spirit. And his poem, which is on page 85, I decided I wanted to read, and it goes like this. I got nothing but love for your ignorant ass. Not because I'm so pious, You see my own ignorance. I see my own ignorance in you. To hate on you would bring me down so my joy could be stolen. But I'm not having that. I must let my love conquer your hate. Trying to count all as joy, trying not to give tit for tat, trying to zero you out. I got nothing for you. No love, no hate. I'm not trying to help or hurt you. So I say nothing in response to your insults, to your insubordination, to greater love. I'm not letting your negativity build up within me. Like water on a duck's back, your venom rolls away as you break your teeth on God's armor. Your ugliness is forgiven, like a baby needing love. I know you act out. You got dirty spiritual diapers. Your soul stinks. Your funky attitude is just the tip of your iceberg. I wish I could clean your spiritual house, but the best I can do is quote scripture. I'm not going to let you provoke me anymore. I rebuke the nasty spirit flowing from you. I know you are only a vessel for your master, with whom I truly battle. I don't wish to cast hot coals on your head by loving you more than you love yourself, but if you continue on this path, you will find it to be too comfortable to hate. The narrow path is bumpy because we must step out of comfort zones to love and to forgive the loveless and the unforgiving. I forgive your trespasses, even though I know you have learned nothing. I will carry your stinking armor because you need to let it go. I only hope that one day you will do the same for another. One day you will spread greater love. And then he leaves a reference to Matthew 23:12, which is, whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be raised to honor. So question 4 is, do you think it is better to meet hate with hate, hate with love, hate with indifference, or some other reaction? And why do you see it that way? Question 5. After several stanzas of saying what he was not going to do, Bell writes, I forgive your trespasses, even though I know you have learned nothing. I will carry your stinking armor because you need to let it go. I only hope that one day you will do the same for another. One day you will spread greater love. Did you have a reaction to this stanza? And if so, what was it? Do you believe it is important for some reason that injured parties extend forgiveness even when that forgiveness is not sought? And question 6. We are left with a reference to Matthew 23:12. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be raised to honor. What do you think this verse means? Do you think black men are humbling or diminishing themselves in this life in anticipation of honor in the afterlife? So let's start with question 4. Do you think it's better to meet hate with hate, or hate with love, or indifference, or something else? Anybody?
Venita, you want to go first?
Why not? I don't believe the right thing for me to do is to meet hate with hate. It's like two magnets together, the negative sides together and the positive sides together. I don't think you can accomplish anything by meeting hate. In some instances, I do believe that you should meet hate with love. Only because there are people that don't know what love is. So I believe sometimes you have to do that. And I've actually been in positions where I've seen results, positive results. They met me with hate, I've met them with love, and they're like, wow. Because they never even knew it existed. So I think meeting hate with love is, for me, most times, the best way for me to go. And occasionally I meet it with indifference. Sometimes you just have to know when to hold and know when to fold. Sometimes you just have to fall back. And I've done that. Where I don't feel hate, I don't feel love, I just need to fall back. Because probably my time would be utilized best of giving love to someone that's ready to accept it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the way I feel about it.
Thank you.
I remember this saying, I don't know if you've heard it before, but it was talking about grudges. It says, holding a grudge, which I think a large segment of our community does, against our past and the ancestors, for our ancestors and their ancestors, for what has transpired during the days of slavery. And not only the days of slavery, but even what happened all the way up through the 60s with the lynching and what's happening now. But they said holding a grudge is like swallowing poison and hoping the other person dies.
Mm.
And when I think about that, I also think about the docility that Scripture provokes within our community, because all the other Christians are not necessarily following the same Scripture, being humble, being quiet, whatever. So when I think about reconciliation, I'm very, very convoluted. Because I was raised a Christian, and the Christ said, turn the other cheek. They smack you. Well, I got two cheeks. And I think in terms of when I was young, and some of the spankings I got was prefaced by, I'm only doing this because I love you. So when I think about love does not necessarily always come in passive methods. Sometimes love is expressed through what they call tough love, through the denial of access to my weaker side, or my docile side, or my passive side. And when we talk about love, love of what? Is there a love in standing by and watching my child being massacred or persecuted or oppressed? Is that love? Is that, can I, and it's not so much can I forgive. Yes, I can forgive, but that does not mean I should not take a role in altering it, or enforcing or attempting to effectuate some type of change. And I think that the institution has been so good at providing propaganda, and taking away our self-love, that we live upon a basis generally of fear of the institution, and consequently we have really truly forgot how to love ourselves as a people, but I think before we can give love to others, we have to love ourselves first.
There you go.
I agree.
There you go.
Very, very much. And I've talked about it before in our other book group. What really disturbed me about the forgiveness that was offered to Dylan Roof following the murder of 9 people at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston last summer, was that it was so quick. Not only was the boy not looking for forgiveness, it was so quick. They were offering up this forgiveness, before they had even put their dead in the ground, and And it concerns me that we're it seems like when we're following sort of, you know, what we perceive to be the religious path, that we're not even taking a moment to deal honestly and genuinely with our own grief, with our own emotions. Um, and it strikes me as very unhealthy. And you know, I mean, I think, you know, and this is ironically actually Martin Luther King's birthday. But you know, I know there seem to be quite a few young people today that really don't get the whole nonviolent approach, and and you know, and see it as weakness. I don't see it as weakness. You know, I actually see it as a great strength. But for me, what's odd about that era in our history um, is that we were learning how to extend forgiveness, but we weren't learning how to we weren't focusing on how to love ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I just believe firmly that before you can actually love somebody else, you have to have something to give. You have to have something in your bank, you know. Um, and if you don't have anything in your bank, but you know you're giving out love, then you know you're in the red. You got a deficit going on, and that's a problem.
Right. And
Um,
that's who we are as a people. You know, we've been having that deficit for, you know, decades, maybe even a century or so, you know, being forgiving, you know, being bankrupt, you know, and you know, our values being watered down, you know, in that sense, you know, I don't know, you know, I agree with you, Logan, and also, you know,
yeah, yeah. But you know, I agree with you all that it's not a good idea to meet hate with hate.
yeah,
I
Um,
didn't say because I don't meet hate with hate that I've necessarily forgiven you. I did not say that.
no, I didn't accuse you of saying
No,
that.
I'm just, not saying no, that does not mean that I have forgiven you. That
Mm,
means that I don't choose to meet your hatred with hatred. But it does not mean that there's not something back here that's going to come up here. Because usually it will, which for me is to do something about something.
mm-hmm.
I feel the same way you do, Logan. I saw that image of black folks.
Oh, wait. Bill got you calling me Logan now? Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry. No, Michelle, I
don't
saw.
blame that on me. I forgive you for blaming that on me.
Normally I call her Michelle, and I think might have been on my mind is her mother Loga, which is has been on my mind. Um, but Michelle, I saw that image, and I was thinking about Loga. I was thinking about your mother as I'm saying this, because you know how I adore her, and she is my hero. Um, but we won't get on Loga right now. But I saw that image, Michelle, and I felt the same way you did. I was like, I think it's not always about religion. I think a lot of times black folks are so willing to forgive someone else because it's almost like just drawing this blank. It didn't happen.
mm-hmm.
If I forgive, it didn't happen. If I forgive, I don't have to react. I don't really think it's all about religion.
Yeah. Do you think it might have been conditioning, the fact that you know, if we didn't act like we were forgiven, you know, that we had to face the whip, you know, or lynching?
It very well could be. I mean, you know, you're talking. It very well could be. You know, it depends on where. For instance, in the southern states, which is the Bible Belt,
Mm-hmm.
I expect to see that because that's what they know. You know, it's not. It's put in the Lord's hand, so that way we don't have to think about it. We don't have to address it. We don't have to deal with it. We don't have to react. That's just putting in the Lord's hand. And that's it's conditioning. I think a lot of it is conditioning, Bill. Conditioning to the point where you just black it out. We'll put in the Lord's hand and pass the beans. You know.
Yep.
until there's no beans left to pass, and we'll still put that in the Lord's hand. You know, that's what we don't even know when it's time for us to, you know, when the Lord has enough in His hands. Let's put it that way. When it's time for us to kind of do a little something ourselves. I don't know, Bill. You know,
and I agree with you. I think, you know, through that, if you would, conditioning and indoctrination that we received, you know, in the advent of coming to this country, that, you know, we were then, you know, given Christianity, you know, which is a history to it that we have forgotten. You know, that we embraced it for the purposes of sending messages, you know, between each other. Now it's becoming our life thing. And, you know, I don't have any problem with that. But I think that, you know, a tradition that has, you know, been since then, even to this day, is that we look to that blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus to be our salvation, even if he's personified in the institution. You know, in other words, when we want a bank loan, who are we going to? Blonde hair, blue eyes. If we want, you know, an increase in our food stamps, who are we going to? Blonde hair. If we want justice, who are we going to? Blonde hair, blue eyes. Everything that we want as a community, as opposed to we, you know, rallying and coming to a point where we are instilling and understanding the power that we have, whether it be as consumers or collectively working together. We're looking for, I don't want to say handouts, but we're looking for that privilege to be granted us by someone outside of our community. And, you know, as we know, that generally we're getting enough just to keep quiet.
And he that giveth can take it away. But you know what, that actually makes me think about, I was watching another video recently about Gaddafi and the gold backed coin and monetary system that he was trying to set up in Africa. And of course, the perspective of whoever produced the video was that this is why he was killed. You know, because the Europeans are just not going to have that. So on the one hand, you know, I do agree with you, Bill, that we look outside of ourselves first too often. But you know, there are also plenty of examples of when we have sought independence. You know, it's often met with a lot of backlash.
Right, and again, that reinforces the theory of fear. You know, so how many other African nation leaders are going to step up to the plate now that they've seen the lesson that has been, you know, expounded upon Gaddafi? And I mean, the nation is in ruins now. And like when you look at people like Mugabe, who is being vilified and demonized in the press, but what he's doing is, you know, what they should be doing all over Africa. You know, let's take back what is ours. You know. You know, because you know, we've been colonized, you know, and all kinds of stuff. The biggest, genocidal atrocity happened in Africa. It wasn't in Israel. It wasn't in Germany. It was in Africa. But that doesn't get pressed, because of all the propaganda.
Right.
But it's a good lesson in that. Okay, we can rally together, but what are the consequences? Because they have the military might, and all that kind of stuff, and I'm going to lose my life and whatever, and that becomes fear becomes real for people that are on the bottom.
Right.
I don't want to stick my head out of the gopher hole; it might get cut off.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, Venita, tell you my big issue is courage.
Oh.
Where are we gonna find the courage? But let's move on because it's 7:20. Bill, why don't you read point C, Anthony Arnold?
Point C on Anthony Arnold.
2C.
Okay.
Or 3C.
Okay, 3C, Anthony Arnold. Anthony Arnold uses his poetry to explore the ways in which prejudices by white people lead to negative outcomes for black people, like segregation, racial profiling, and murder. And it says, read You Don't Know Me, page 93. You want me to read 7 and 8 as well?
Why don't you first read the poem on 93?
Okay. Okay, this is by Anthony Arnold, who I might mention is a prolific, conscious, African-American conscious writer, poet. And it's titled, You Don't Know Me. You don't know me, but your mind is made up as you look me up and down, frown at my manner of dress. Am I not a picture of splendor in my droopy jeans and wife beater, knowing that I have more suits and ties than you have ever seen? You don't know me, but I see your arm tighten around that purse as you cross over to the other side of the street, wondering if I might follow you. I have a job, and it pays well. Money is not an object. Neither do I sell drugs, nor do I use. But since I'm hanging with the peeps, first impressions, huh? You don't know me. Your frown as we talk cause you don't understand street talk, slang, ebonics. It's how we get down. I'm college educated, military trained, read and write in languages you will never know. Build from scratch, fix complex machines, but I'm on the corner. I'm ignorant, you say. You don't know me. You only know what you think you see, prejudice and stereotypes. Cloud your thinking, shape your mind. You can't judge a book by its cover. What you think you see might not always be. You don't know me.
Okay. Now 7 and 8.
Okay, let me get back to that page. Okay. 7, under section 3. I had the impression that the writer cares about how blacks are seen by white people, especially when those false images lead to acts of oppression. Did you get that sense too? Okay. And 8, certain communities have been able to close themselves off basically from the dominant culture in America to preserve whatever traditions they hold dear, i.e. the Mormons, the Amish, and the Republic of New Africa. Do you think this is a good idea or not? Do you think it would help black people to heal from the tribulations we have endured on this soil to have a place, and I'm going to assume that's, of our own? Or is it best to continue trying to fit in where in many cases we are simply not wanted? Why or why not?
Well, I like the idea of having a place of our own in theory.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's realistic right now. Given where we are, given who we've become, given the fact that we're not loving ourselves properly, um, and so and so a part of an outcome of that is that we don't want to be together. But but I do think that there's something very attractive about having your own.
Mm-hmm. If I may, I want to go back to the first part of the question, and hopefully a tie in how it correlates, to the second question, 8. And when we think in terms, we had mentioned this last meeting about the propaganda of the news media, the technology, everything from the internet to TV to radio. We have been raised on the same dreams that anybody else in America has. If you got a TV, you see the same dreams. If you look at, for example, the only redeeming, going back when, redeeming television show we had available to us was the Cosbys. Okay. Yet you look at every single, show that is populated by the European American, and you see them living in these sprawling homes. Like the Cosby looked more like an apartment than it did a house, like a row home, Philly or something. But you see these sprawling houses with all this space. Yeah, we all aspire for that. Regardless of what color we are, we aspire for the American dream. And part of that American dream has to come with getting the right job, being accepted, and being treated as an equal. And though reality tells us that for the most part that does not happen, but that does not stop us from vying, for that acceptance. So we're very, very conscious. I admire the youth in one sense, like they don't give a damn. Okay. They're being their own people. However, we know from experience that that's not going to lend to them the opportunities that we perceive would come if we dress the part. But that still does not stop them from perceiving us from a fear perspective, like you were saying, the lady that crossed the street because or clutched the bags. And we, I know as black male, my sons have experienced this, first of all, and I'm more sure black women have experienced this. You go in the store to shop and you're followed, watched, as if you're there to steal something. And we're less likely to steal because we don't want to be persecuted. But I think all that kind of ties in, to how do we come together, tagging back onto what you were saying, Logan, when there's, so much divergent, mentalities and thoughts about this topic. Do we have a common theme? Whereas people like, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and even today, Louis Farrakhan in his small community, gives us common themes that we can rally behind, and we've kind of lost that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think.
Venita? Anything?
Yeah.
You know what? Excuse me for a minute. I'm going to leave the camera on you, and I'll be right back. But, go ahead.
I don't know, Bill. Maybe I'm just that rebel with a cause. I'm not going to live without one, but with a cause. I just don't care. I just don't care. I don't try to project any certain image because I know that it's not going to do anything but take my soul away. They're not going to feel any differently about me. It's not going to make them move any differently around me. It's not going to afford me better opportunities. So I just don't, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't. Never have and never will. I just don't. I've seen the results. And the only thing you lose is yourself. You lose your mind, you lose your body, you just lose everything. And I may, you know, if I don't have the money, if I don't have the home, if I don't have the this and that, at least I want to have me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I agree with you.
I speak proper English. I cover my body.
Mm-hmm.
I treat
I agree with you.
You know, fairly and kind and with compassion and empathy. And that's what I do. And that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not doing any extra.
Right. And I agree with you. I think somewhere in the fray we lost ourselves.
You're always trying to assimilate, always trying to please them. You know, talk like them, walk like them. I remember when I first moved to Connecticut in 1978. Aaron was a year old. And I remember coming to a place I didn't know anyone and going to a big insurance company and how the few black folks there had to try to assimilate, you know, wear the same suit to the side haircut, you know, the whole, you know, to try to look as Caucasian as you possibly could. And I used to still sit there, you know, and that was in '78, and I was a very young woman, like, really?
Mm-hmm.
Because I never saw where it, you know, what it led to. Only thing I saw was just losing your soul. You know, that's something I'm going to hold on to. You know, no matter what, you're not taking that.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have to literally sell your soul to the devil.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
I just won't do it.
Exactly. I agree.
I won't do it. And I wouldn't suggest that my children do it. I'd rather have them put their energies into something else. You know, like helping some children, you know, molding children, showing them the way, showing them something different. But I'm not going to spend my time trying to please white folks, walk, talk, think. No, we ain't going to do it. It ain't going to happen. I'm done.
Yeah, I just, you know, in terms of the question about, you know, sort of withdrawing into ourselves versus, you know, I really think a lot of what we're dealing with are the impacts of integration. Certainly, you know, when we were segregated, to a certain extent, we did have some opportunity to have our own. Um, you know, I mean, we're still a part of America, whether we're segregated or integrated. You know, we're still living in a capitalist system. We're still using the dollar, you know, and not the diner. Uh, you know, but nevertheless, within that context, um, you know, quite a few of us had it going on. And so I'm just concerned that we're really not doing enough assessment. You know, and I say all the time, Bill, I always saw integration as an experiment. You know, um, I mean, technically, I guess, is not an experiment, but it's an experiment to me in the sense that no one had ever done this. You know, and so we didn't really know how it was going to go. But I think at some point we have to make that assessment. And I think that that's, you know, what the young people are struggling with today in that, you know, in a lot of ways, it's not working very well for a lot of people. But it's so taboo to kind of talk about it because what's the alternative?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a heavy question. What is the alternative?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, but white folks are losing their minds, and I mean, this thing with Barack, really sent them over the edge. I have a rule that if I have the television on, which I don't really do that often, but if I turn on the TV and I hear the name Trump, I change the channel. And I very often have to go through several channels before I can find one that is not, promoting this insanity. Um, but on those rare occasions when I allow myself to kind of take in what he's putting out, um, damn.
That's hatred.
Yeah.
And if it was just him,
no.
But no.
A lot of folks feel the way he does.
A lot of folks feel the way he does. And so somewhere, to me, we have to acknowledge that we still have a very deep problem.
Yes.
With race relations in this country. And the question is, what are we going to do about it?
I just don't know if you can take hatred out of people's hearts. I think that's something that they have to want. What are we going to do about it? I don't know. What can you do about it? Hatred is all in here.
Yeah.
And white folks in this start going crazy since Barack took office. They went crazy right before then when they lost that money on Wall Street. That was the beginning of the crazy. And then after that, we had a seemingly black man to come up and sit in the White House. Well, that just pushed them over the edge. They was on the edge before he got there. Yeah. So you start messing with their money, you could take their wife, their car, their house, but do not, and their food. Don't mess with the money. So that
or the dogs.
And Barack just kind of pushed them over the edge. It's like, they literally was saying, "Oh my God, what else could happen to us?" The Wall Street done fell apart. The banks is going down, took our money with them, and now we got a black president. It was just too much for them to handle. And they were angry before he got there. Remember, I don't know if you remember, but I do. They were talking about how to get him out before he was elected.
Yeah.
There was a campaign on how we're going to remove a man from office that has not been elected yet. They're preparing themselves.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you're going to take hatred out of someone's heart. I just don't know. There's a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Without putting their arms openly, anything might happen.
If we could at least take it off national TV.
I think that.
For a minute.
Go ahead.
My husband calling from Jamaica.
Okay. If I may say so, I'm very, very mindful, Logo, of categorically judging white folks, quote unquote white folks. And I always have to preface it, some white folks. Just like there are some African Americans that have lost their damn minds, who are supposed to be, who we expect to be, just like you were saying about Barama, empathic to the cause, who are not, which lends back to, the previous comment in reference to, what happened in the fact that as we ascribe to the same value systems, one of the first things we want to do is get up out of our neighborhoods. We want to live like them in the same type of house, in the same type of neighborhood. And not all of them want us there or, are comfortable with us being there, but sometimes when we go into those particular type of neighborhoods, we want to take the same attitudes that we had, like the big parties with a lot of noise and whatever the case may be, and that's not their way, so they feel uncomfortable. So I think if we're going to assimilate into the American culture, then we have to really understand what it is. But by the same token, the trade-off is the fact that we are losing our culture, in doing so. So we have to have that particular type of consciousness. Like in other words, if we're going to be quoted, as being a sellout, then we got to realize consciously that we should not be mad if we're quoted as being a sellout. You know, you know, that's our choice.
I guess let's let's move on. I'll read William Washington. Uh, William Washington looks at the sexual relationships between revolutionary black men and women during the 1960s and 70s, as well as how these images influenced his own relationship to women. Then, instead of us going home to Mama, my father and the other men Panthers, uh, my father and the other men Panthers would have sex with the women Panthers, he wrote in Going to a Revolution. Question 9. Is that something you think children see a lot? Their fathers having sex with women other than their mother? If so, how much of an influence do you imagine such images would have on the child's future relationships? And question 10. This was the era of free love, and there was talk in some quarters of the need to have lots of babies to grow the black nation. What was the impact of this free love on the civil rights and black power movements? From today's perspective, do you think it's possible to achieve revolutionary economic goals in an atmosphere of free love? Do you think it's possible or advisable for men and women to control their sexual desires when engaging in revolutionary practice? So, Bill, how old are you?
64.
Okay, so you, I'm sure, have a better perspective on the sort of free love era than Venita and I, who are, relative babies by comparison. so,
Okay.
so why don't you start us off?
Well, I think that, well, he's also younger than I am as well. Okay. And I think there is some general perceptions that are, incongruous to that era. Okay. In that, when it came to free love, we represented a very, very small minority of that movement, which is, primarily, the hippies, which were basically made up of, European Americans. Our thing back in those days was black power, black power, assimilating, to the needs of our community. We didn't have time for the free love per se. We had other agendas that were more dire, than, sitting around, having multiple mates and all that kind of stuff. That does not go to say that, we did not practice, a polygamous type of attitude. I'm not saying that, but that was not the purpose. Was perhaps our sexual hormones more so, and identifying with the people as opposed to a movement. That was not a part of our movement at that time. Not to say that there were no blacks that participated in it. Sure, there were, a token few, that were like far out, man, but that was not our movement. Our movement was more towards, black liberation, black power, and, rallying around our needs during those times. And, when we think about the 60s, late 60s, we just came out of an era where, during those days, like, people were still being lynched in Mississippi, Alabama, murdered, and what have you. Our people were still being whatever. So that was the concern of our community, was maintaining the status quo and to not be persecuted because of the color of our skin.
So he's relating, some things that he says he witnessed as a young person, and and maybe he did, or maybe his perceptions were a little skewed, but let let me just read this first paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm going to a revolution. Yeah, I got my hair cut, a brand new pimp suit, shiny gaiters. Forgot to kiss my wife goodbye. I'll see that bitch later. I'm going to a revolution. Cash my check. Should I help pay some bills? Maybe pay some rent? Hell no. I'm keeping every cent. She gonna be mad at me when I get back in. But I'll quiet her ass with this pipe between her lips. Then I'll get up early, fix her some breakfast, then take the family to church. Maybe I'll even repent. Bullshit. I'd rather pay rent. So it kind of goes on like that. Um, I guess my question is, given your perspective of age, do you think this is so what I got out of this is a part of what he's saying is that how he saw men and women relating to each other in his childhood
Mm-hmm.
influenced the way he related to the women in his life when he became an adult. So
Right.
I don't know. Do you think this is representative, or do you think this is like a ghetto perspective, or what?
Well, I think that we have to allow some leeway in reference to interpretation. And the fact that most certainly it is not a part of my experience, nor have I witnessed anything like that. Okay. I may have heard stories later on in my life about those particular type of conditions, but it was a very, very minor thing. It was not a representation of our community, our people, at least not the type of people in the community I came in, and I've been in a few of them. So I think it might be a very, very personal perspective, and we cannot accept that as the end all be all as to who we were. I feel saddened to think that any child has to experience that. Especially one of our own. I'm saddened, by that perspective as to that's the way you saw that. But I can't speak to it other than the fact that it's foreign and alien to my experience.
Benita, did you have anything on that section?
I feel the way Bill does. I didn't know any folks like that personally.
Mm-hmm.
The neighborhood that I grew up in, which is still the city of Philadelphia, most folks that I knew when I was a young child, and I would say up to my teenage years, they were black families that didn't manufacture any kind of drugs in their basement. Everything was pretty much family oriented. People went to work every day. Mamas cooked dinner. Help with homework. Um, but I'm sure there are many children then and now that are growing up in those situations. And yes, I do think it shrews their perception on how life should be, or can be, or will be for them in their personal relationships with their family, friends, love interests. It really is sad.
Yeah, this piece made me sad.
It made me very sad. And to refer to a woman, I'll see that bitch later.
Really?
I mean, that just really, I had to stop and have me some coffee behind that.
Yeah.
If my father said something like that, all the children would have been on his butt.
So it's just, and then everything was secondary. It's like she was nothing. I cried her with a pipe.
Yeah.
Fix a little breakfast. Sit down, shut up, bitch. I mean, this is a bit much for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If anything, I think it might have been a if anything, knowing him, I think it might have been a parody, of the minority, of within our community. And keep in mind, he came up in New York, so it's a much more diverse community, in reference to family atmosphere than we would see, like, say, in Jersey or Connecticut, and even Philadelphia, because you have more people per capita, in a square mile, whatever the case may be. So I can't say that was him, or I can't say it was not him, but I do know that it's a position that I reject, because it does not represent me. It does not represent the people I know, the families I knew, or the families I came up. It does not represent the block I grew up on in Philadelphia. It does not represent the people I knew in South Jersey, and I don't know anybody personally like that. I have met some people that perhaps I might look at them strange and say, hey, these are not my type of people, but I didn't spend too much time around them,
All right.
Yeah.
All right. And then the other thing, he says he saw his father kill a white person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He saw a lot.
He said he saw a lot. Yeah. All right. Well, let's 7:51. We're doing pretty good. Let's look at the love note. Was there anything that spoke to you of love in these readings?
The need for it.
Yeah. That's what I got out of it.
When I go back to Anthony Arnold, for example, I see that in reference to his revolutionary stance, I see the need, as you said, we were talking about earlier about for acceptance, but I also see the message that getting out to other people that, hey, we need to accept ourselves. If nobody else, we need to accept ourselves.
Right.
So to me that exemplifies love. Like we were talking about earlier, if you can't love yourself, then you can't love anybody else righteously, because you first have to have love for yourself. Right. Now, as far as William Washington is concerned, that's kind of like a whole different perspective, as I was saying earlier, than what I'm accustomed to. So, I can see the need for love, but I can't see any way that it ties into the actualization of love, for me personally. And that's not to critique him. I love him. He's my brother, and all that kind of stuff. His views are very, very radical, in the sense because he speaks raw, and, that particular piece of rawness, like I said, is foreign to me. So, I mean, how much commentary can I have for it?
Okay, yeah, no, I really very much felt the same way. And even with the piece, like You Don't Know Me, for example, takes me to a place of why do we even give a shit? And we need enough love to be able to put other people's perceptions of us into off to the side somewhere. It's not our most important. I don't think it's our most important concern.
Well, can I say something about that? And I was thinking about this earlier. I have a 17-year-old son. I might have mentioned this earlier, a couple of weeks ago, who lives in an upscale community because his aunt is a psychiatrist. She makes plenty of money and all this kind of stuff. He has a job, which requires him to either skateboard or walk home from the job, and he has to walk through this community, and he's complained many times, how, the looks, the stares, the apprehension, the locking of the doors, all this kind of stuff, that transpires as he's walking through his community. So when I think about that, you don't know me, I've faced that many, many times of being judged basically whatever. And so I do have to care, because if I'm not on my P's and Q's, that judgment may lead to something else, or whatever. So I might put on my most disarming step and fetch it smile and say, "How you doing?" Or whatever the case may be, even though I don't feel like it, because I don't want no crap, out of these folks that are judging me because of the color of my skin. And that may be a defensive posture. It's not fear, but it's a defensive posture, because I realize the game that we're playing, the game, whose game it is. It ain't our game, so most certainly we have to be able and adapt and understand the game board that we're playing on. So I on one hand, yes, I agree with you. On the other hand, I'm not disagreeing with you, but on the other hand, I'm saying that, we got to be consciously aware of our circumstances, our surroundings, the people we encounter, though it's not always evident or, prolific, but most certainly it doesn't hurt us to be conscious and aware.
I do agree. Venita, anything? Did you spot any love?
I feel love amongst us.
I'm talking about in the book.
No, really, I believe we have to be aware of how people perceive us. But I do not think that we should put our energies there. Whether you love me or not, I just don't really have time to worry about that. I have to be aware of my surroundings and what ramifications could take place if you're feeling hatred in your heart. But I can't wear it on our sleeve. I agree with Michelle. We have a lot of things to think about, and I can't do that. But I do feel love. I didn't feel any negativeness in You Don't Know Me. I felt a lot of love, that he really loved himself. And he was actually saying, I love me, and you don't know me to be going around saying this or thinking that or perceiving this or perceiving that. Who are you? Because I love me. So I felt love in that piece. I felt like he had a lot of self-love, and he was letting you know that I love me. I don't know why you feel the way you do or why you're perceiving what you think you thought, but I love me. Now, that's what you got. Put it where you can use it the most. I don't think he was trying to convince anybody of anything. Please accept me. I just think he was saying, this is it. You put it where you can use it the most. So I felt love in that piece. I thought it was actually, I really enjoyed that.
Okay. And we do have a tendency, not just in the black-white binary, but, we judge each other.
Yes.
Very, very frequently without knowing squat.
Yes.
And I know I'm just always trying to put all of that in a context and not take it personally. Because I don't know why people do it. I always say, if you want anything you want to know about me, ask me a question. And, 99% of the time, I'm going to tell you way more than you ever wanted to know. So there's no reason to project, these imaginary qualities onto me. But for whatever reason, that's where people are. And in fact, that's a part of what I want to do with these reading series is get us back in the habit of getting to know each other, having real conversations. And Venita knows, I grew up in a home where that's just the way it was. But I missed that. I missed that in my adult life, and I think it's important because I think when we don't really know how to, or we don't invest the time in getting to know each other, that lends itself to projecting things onto people that are just wrong. So, Bill, do you have any poetry for us tonight out of one of those 40 books of yours?
Yeah, I was going to read a poem, but I do want to read something that speaks to just being, and let me pull it up. I don't know how you living. If I can find it here. Thank God for search. Okay, it's titled How You Living. And, I'd written this back in 2012. But for me, it's still relevant because I have to ask myself this question, often. And it's, written to us, if it would ever open.
Okay, well, be sure I get your whole face. I like to see your pretty face.
Okay. Well, see, I'm not, okay, let me get back to the camera. But I can't watch the camera and the document at the same time. Okay. Okay, can you see my face?
Yeah.
Okay. But this is titled How You Living. For all those brothers, sisters, and rabble-rousers still complaining and looking for that 40 acres and a mule, get over it. It ain't going to happen. It has not happened over the past 147 plus years. Why are you still waiting in line? X, King, Garvey, Truth, Evers, Parks, and many more others who were living their dreams in power could not make it happen. What makes you think that sitting around, excuse my language, bitching about it will actualize such a bounty? For all those who sit around and find some joy speaking on what the white man has done and is doing to us as a people, wake up. What the white man is doing is not nearly as important or significant as to what we are doing to ourselves.
Amen.
On to excuses for our misery instead of standing up and creating the change we desire, as Malcolm said, by any means necessary. For all those who would like to cry over the spilled milk, misfortune, repression, and other aspects of slavery, take the chains off your mind and your spirit. Unlock your greater self. You have the key. You continue to minimize their unwilling sacrifice of their lives in remaining a slave to the past instead of examining and embracing the power you so willingly ignore in your now. You are powerful enough to make the change you seek for yourself, your children, your family, your community, your people, and the world. Believe in yourself, as did our ancestors who died to provide you with this opportunity. For those of us who would raise up and hold ourselves above that of our brothers and sisters, excuse my language, get a fucking grip. No one man is better than another. Sure, we all have different and varying degrees of expression. We all vibrate to different frequencies of thought, whether it be good or bad. We all have different perspectives, as exemplified here in my own personal diatribe. This does not make me right for you, nor all. These are but my words for me. Should you wish to partake of what I have to offer, I am more than happy to share with you. For in a collective such as family, community, and humanity, the greater good is not found in dissension, but in a collective consciousness of goodness and unity. It is not about the path we individually walk, but the direction we all are going. Which way are you headed? For us all, from my personal experiences of facing my truth, I am the first to admit that I can be an asshole. This usually comes to bear when I see too much of myself and less of the beauty of the world, the people, and the creative possibilities that are about me. I am not an ostrich, so therefore I become this asshole when I forget that at times I have my head up my ass, and I become that which I see. I need to see the light. Finally, do not underestimate the power of love. The vibratory frequency of love can pierce any barriers known and unknown to man. I have smiled at strangers and they smiled back. I have engaged in conversations with persons of bias, and at the end of our exchange, we have discovered an uncharted common ground. If I hold myself apart, then I am. I choose the possibilities of what may become. What I am and have always been, I am all too familiar with, and I tire of the same old meal each day. I seek to expand my consciousness that I may discover, experience, and enjoy the fruit found in the big garden where all is sweet. This cannot be achieved while I sit here in this weed-laden field of my woes and complaints about my life and its circumstances. I choose. This alone is our greatest power, just ahead of belief and faith, the power to choose, to think differently, walk differently, and live differently. This has a way of assisting me to dream differently, and I just love it. If for nothing else, I feel so much better about all things now, not tomorrow, but right now. And now I must ask you and myself, for the sake of our ancestors, our children, and myself, how you living?
Bravo.
How
Thank
you
you.
living?
Yeah.
All right. All right. That was that is the question. That is the question. We have choices.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you for the opportunity to read it.
Yeah, well, Venita and I just love this. I mean, we got
Oh,
like our personal poetry reading going on.
Bill, I look forward to this at the end of the evening when we're done, and you can read this all evening. I can sit back and
All
relax.
right. You know what? Don't tempt me because I could read poetry the rest of my life and never get bored.
And I don't get bored either. I love it. I absolutely
Yeah.
love it. Yes.
Because I
Well,
write a lot too. So.
yeah, yeah. Well, Benita, you got time for another one?
Yeah, girl. Yeah, come
Okay.
on, Bill. Come on.
Okay.
What you got? Rashid's not here. Sharif's not here.
Okay. I just closed one. This is from an experience when we talked about when did you first, realize, racism, and it didn't dawn on me, at the age because I was very, very young, and I was living at the time in Savannah, Georgia, with my grandmother, my mother, and I. My father was in the Korean War, and his title, "I Will Not Go Quietly into the Night." When I was a child of about 2 to 3 years of age, I had the opportunity to go into town with my grandmother, endearingly known as Grandma Weeze, which was short for Louise. Myself being the only child at the time, I was doted upon with much love and celebration. You see, both my parents were somewhat orphaned and only children. They were raised by someone other than their natural parents. I was so loved being the firstborn. There was nothing I did not have, want for, or needed. Well, on this occasion, we went to town on a typical Saturday morning. This was a very exciting time for a young child, especially one as precocious as myself. When we arrived in the town, which I will not mention, well, we know it's Savannah, we went to the local superstore, which was like a Cressus. A superstore at that time was an exciting adventure. They had food items, snacks, toys, clothing, and most of all, people, different people of all types, shapes, colors, sizes, etc. This was truly a treat for a young, curious mind such as mine. They even had a soda fountain. To set up this scenario, I spent a couple of years after my birth in the South. Having been born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, my mother traveled back to her home for family support. My father was overseas in the Korean War, and my mother was a cute, young, 20-year-old female in a city that she knew not and alone. So going back south to her family home, a familiar setting was safe. Anyway, in the store, I was in a world of wonder. I still have this picture of excitement embedded in my spirit. Of course, me being the energetic and hyper type of young boy I was, my grandma, of course, kept me on a very tight leash, figuratively speaking. This was a South of 1953, a place that was clearly evident that people had their place, retrospectively speaking. As a natural explorer of life with an eye full of wonder and a mind full of questions, I did not know of this premise. And quite frankly, I am not sure I would have acquiesced if I did. Georgia is a unique state, then as it is now. It has quite a bit of color to its demeanor. So in the store, I discovered in our journey that there was this place where people sat down, a soda counter. And of all the wonders, the seats were round and they spun around. Wow. This was probably the first time I ever saw such a contraption. I was smitten and taken. Somehow I imagined I managed quite cleverly, I must say, to escape the close quarters of my grandmother's watchful eye and made my way to this personal merry-go-round. I excitedly climbed aboard and took my place in the most ultimate of glee on my quixotic adventure. The elderly lady, who was white by the token, behind the counter looked at me and smiled in a somewhat quizzical manner, which I later came to understand as, well, who knows. At that age, any one adult was elderly. Anyway, my grandmother spotted me and quickly came over and said, "Boy, get down from there." Of course, me being the adventurous, curious explorer of life and knowledge that I am, I simply asked why. I don't quite remember being given an adequate explanation then or at a later time, but I had no other choice but to obey, for my grandmother hurriedly lifted me with an apology to the lady behind the counter. This went by me like a marble snowball rolling down Mount Everest. But what did strike me, and thus left an indelible impression upon my young curious mind to this day, was the dubious reply from the lady behind the counter, and that was, "He must not be from round here, huh?" I will not dignify the meaning of an inane explanation of what was meant, or will I acknowledge, hopefully ever, that there are lines drawn in our experiences that separates me from you. But I will say this: it is up to me as to whether I embrace these predetermined limits on myself or not. I will not go quietly into the night.
Wow.
Wow. And that's the name of it? I will not go quietly
Into the night, yes.
into the night. Yeah, you know, one of the questions that we didn't get to tonight was, when did you, first become aware of racism? Is that your story? Is that?
Well, I can't say I was aware of racism because I didn't know what racism was at that age. It was something I just didn't like as to how I was treated. So retrospectively, I had another situation when I was in third grade where we had a teacher that at the end of the day would kiss all the boys, and when she got to me, she turned her head. Again, I didn't understand that. I was hurt by it, but I didn't understand it because I didn't understand there was a difference between black and white. That was not, something that was, drilled into our head. Nowadays, I think the differences are more prevalent than they were then, because I went to a school that was black and white. I had crushes on white girls. I didn't know that she was a white girl. She was this girl that I thought was pretty. So those particular type of things were not put upon or profoundly exemplified with our coming up. Now when going to the South, I understood that as my grandmother used to say, forgive me for saying this, crackers did not live where Negroes lived. They had their place, we had our place, but we were okay with that. We had fun. We didn't feel put upon. We had meals. We had a roof over our head. We went to church. We did all the things. We had Easter clothes. We had Christmases. We had all this stuff, and we didn't feel bad about that. That's not to say I'm a proponent for segregation, or integration, but by the same token, times were most certainly different back in those days than they are now. That's all it is. Family was cherished. That's probably the biggest thing. And when I say family, not only the immediate family that lived under the same roof, but communal family. The whole community was a family.
Well, thank you. Those are great, Bill. Venita likes to complain that she and we don't have stories like say, you know what you always say, Venita.
Yeah.
Well, Venita, I tell you what I'll do, because I love you so much. I wrote this book called Stories, Fables, and Quaint Little Tales, and both of those pieces are in it. And if Logan would be so kind to send me your address again, I know I got it somewhere, but Lord, I don't want to look for it. But send me your address again, I'll send you a copy of that book.
Oh, that'd be fabulous.
Yeah.
Because it's from, it's a lot of, like I said, fable and tales. A lot of it's imaginary, and some of it's factual.
I love it. Bill, may I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
When is your birthday?
April the 8th.
Yeah.
Ask her when hers is.
When is yours?
April 12th. You my people.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. But we won't talk about that. We don't want to make Logan feel bad.
No.
No. You my people too.
Okay. When's your birthday, Logan?
We people.
I'm December 17th, which is a fire sign.
Yes.
And Venita and I were looking at people's birthdays from, who was it? Was it the January 1st hangout? Or I think it was when Purify Love was here.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's also an Aries.
Yes.
And Henry was here, and he's a Leo.
Yes.
Fire sign.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of passion in the room that night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A lot of fire.
There was a lot of fire. Yeah. So anyway,
well, that's a good thing. You know what the Native Americans did. Just a little folklore. Is that when they wanted a rebound crop, what they would do is burn the plains completely. So the growth would be more prolific and would also draw back the game that they hunted. So a lot of times we have to burn things down in order to build them back up properly.
I know that's right.
Those Aries and Sagittarius and Leos will burn some stuff down to build it back up.
Oh yeah.
On fire.
So, thank you, Bill, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have a viewer that just turned in. Sorry, we are closing for the night. And, we're off next week, Bill.
We are?
That's our break week. So
okay.
we'll reconvene the following week, which I think is January 29th. Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
All right. Have a great week, everybody.
Okay. Good night, Bill. Good night, Michelle.
Good night. Okay.